Blog Talk Radio. Welcome to the Medlock Post radio show. This is where we educate, entertain, enlighten, and empower. The views and opinions on the Medlock Post radio show are those of the host and guests. They are not necessarily the views and opinions of Blog Talk Radio, Spreaker.com, its corporations, affiliates, or any other podcast streaming services. And here is your host, Richard G. Medlock.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen, and happy Valentine's Day, this February 14th, 2023. It was interesting this morning. I got a email from Family Search, which I do a lot of my genealogy work on, and they gave records of ancestors that were married. Now, the first one was married on this date, way back in the early 1800s. And then it started going through. My parents were in there, and grandparents, great-grandparents, great-great-great-grandparents were all listed in there. All these marriage dates. It was interesting. Way back in the early 1800s, I kept watching the age that they were married. And a lot of 16, 17-year-old women, but men were normally 18 or older, sometimes 24, and a few years older than the women. But then here comes one. She was 16, he was 17. And that was typical in the 1800s, 1700s, and even before that. So, but it's interesting. I'm going to get some of those things posted on our family Facebook page. I haven't had time. I've been running all morning. This is in the afternoon. I normally do the program in the morning, but I've been going all day. This is your host, Richard G. Medlock, and this is the Medlock Post radio show, episode 112. And again, February 14th, 2023. Our episode today is Influence of the State and Federal Governments Compared. Now, this is based on the teachings or the principles from Federalist 46 that James Madison wrote to help the colonists understand why we need the new Constitution. So we're going to get into that today. But before we get there, I want to start out. Of course, Sunday, February 12th, was Abraham Lincoln's birthday. So I want to play this sound bite, and this is a person being Abraham Lincoln.
What an honor it is to speak to each of you today concerning our great nation and the Constitution. For it is the only safeguard of our liberties. Nowhere in the world is presented a government of so much liberty and equality. To the humblest and poorest among us are held out the highest privileges and positions. That document gives us the freedom that each true American deserves. We must change ourselves to be passionate about its design, and we must protect the purity of that great document. For it is not in the trust of politicians that we must lay our hopes, but in we, the people, for which that document was written, that we in order would establish a more perfect union and establish justice and tranquility for all. If you wish to be a keeper of the Republic today, then join the 917 Society as myself and others have done. That being said, appoint yourself as keeper of the Constitution of the United States of America, and it shall remain. May God bless you and preserve this great nation.
All right, Abraham Lincoln, his words. Yes, that was from the 917 Society, which had just, in January 28th, had a big gala down at the Mar-a-Lago in Florida, a fundraiser. A lot of people were there. I've got to get Joni back on the show to talk about it. She's been real busy ever since. But Abraham Lincoln says, don't trust the people in government. Trust we the people. Sound words, folks. We should take it upon ourselves to protect the Constitution. Nobody else is going to do it, as we're seeing in Washington, D.C. They're not doing it. It's left up to us, folks. Us'uns, as we say in the South. Us'uns. All right. The CPI came out this morning. And there's really a lot of unhappy people, folks. The CPI, the inflation report, came out just the opposite of what they wanted it to say. What have they been telling us? Oh, inflation's under control. Isn't that what Mr. Biden told us in his State of the Union? Everything's fine, honky-dory. Isn't that what they spout every day on social media? Everything is just fine. We're in control. We're doing what needs to be done to get the bread on the table and money in your pockets and on and on. And it's all a bunch of baloney, folks. So here we go. We're out here listening to this, but inflation jumped, folks. It jumped. And instead of coming in at plus 0.3, it came in at 0.5, which ran the inflation rate from 6.2 on a yearly basis to 6.4. So that means prices are going up, not going down. Now, if you take the core number, that the core number is minus food and energy, which are big numbers in this. It still went up plus 0.4%. Now, they're trying to tout that because that's only at 5.7% annual basis. No. Because all of us are out there buying food and energy every day, right? We use energy every day in our home, in our cars, and whatever we have. Stock market went down. The stock market didn't like it. The Fed is now scrambling. What do we do? Which way do we go? We knew this. We as consumers did not have to be told that inflation's going up. I mentioned yesterday, my wife went out to buy Valentine cards Saturday, and they were $6 a piece, the cheapest ones she could find. And she walked away. And I said, fine, that works for me. Valentine's Day is more than just a card. So now they scrambled on this one, folks, to get this out. And, of course, the mainstream media is right there with them. A little while ago, they came out with the White House economic report. And their economic advisor came out. I read the article right before we came on the air. I just laughing. spouting, oh, we've created 12 million jobs and we've increased wages and inflation's under control. And all. They had to scramble to put that report out or to go out and make that statement after this morning's inflation report. And I posted it on the Medlock Post Facebook group. And I put in there and I says, they know, I says, have they not realized that the American people have already debunked what they're saying, these numbers they're giving us, that we know better? We're in reality, they're not. They're scrambling, folks. They're hurting. They know that they're losing, and they will do everything they can to stay in power. Now, I don't know if you saw this yesterday. A lot of debate going on about Joe Biden. Is he going to run for president? Is he going to be the candidate? And so forth. Well, the Democratic National Committee, the spokesperson, came out yesterday and said, Joe Biden is running for president and will be the candidate. Not that he's running for president, but he will be the candidate. And if he's not, Vice President Kamala Harris will be the presidential candidate for the Democratic Party. There was no well, where's your primaries? What's happened to the primaries? Doesn't the people get a say about who's going to represent them on the Democratic side? I guess not, according to the DNC. Is it all rigged already? They like to rig and steal elections. And I can sit here today and tell you they're doing everything they can right now to steal the 2024 elections. Now, you can call me a conspirator or whatever. I don't care. I mean, we've already proven that they are good at it. And they're desperate to stay in power. The globalists are desperate for them to stay in power. The Chinese are desperate for them to stay in power. The Ukrainians are desperate. The Russians are desperate. Mexico and Canada, I don't know if they're desperate, but they signed this declaration for North America on January 10th, and they're going to finalize it in the next couple of months to make Canada, Mexico, and America one country. No borders, conspiracy theorists, whatever you want. Conspiracies that we've been talking about for 10, 15, 20 years have now proven they weren't conspiracies. The only thing that's a conspiracy out there is climate change and vaccinations. So the Democratic Marxist propaganda marches on, continues to march on. They're not letting up. They don't intend to let up. Apparently, they're going to keep shooting stuff out of the air, tell us they are, to make it sound like, would the DHS secretary come out this morning? Oh, Biden has control. There's no national security concerns anymore. He's in control. Well, how many of you feel comfortable with that comment? I certainly don't. Just because they come out and say something doesn't make it true. They've proven they don't know how to tell the truth. Yesterday, the Center for Disease Control, the CDC, came out with a report that was actually in media. Face mask made little to no difference in preventing spread of COVID, scientific review finds. And the CDC released this. We all knew that. We've known it for a long time. But now they're coming, oh, yeah, you guys were right. Oh, you conspiracy theorists about the mask. Well, you were right. We're there. Now, Biden in his State of the Union address, let me get these things out of the way. And we're going to get to a couple of items here. One of them, Federalist 46, and the other one is An American Valentine. You're going to like this story. And it goes well with Black History Month. You're going to like that little story. Play the disclaimer, didn't I? Yeah, I did. Okay. I got to make sure here. Joe Biden, in his State of the Union, said he wants to ban assault weapons. Well, guess what? Despite Biden's threats to ban assault weapons, Americans make it clear they're keeping their guns. During Biden's State of the Union address last week, he made a very powerful statement saying that assault rifles needed to be banned. Ban assault weapons now. Ban them now once and for all. Well, according to the Vice President of the National Rifle Association, the NRA, Lieutenant Colonel Wiles Lee, U.S. Army retired, that speech didn't stop a lot of gun owners from coming out to participate in a gun show in Pennsylvania. We just had a celebration for the Second Amendment, Wiles said in the Monday edition of the Just the News No Noise TV show. We just had a great American outdoor show in Pennsylvania this past week. 200,000 patriots came through the door. So if anybody thinks that folks aren't interested in this issue or in their freedoms, they're solely mistaken. Now, that's only part of that article. That's the first part of it. JustTheNews.com. Go there and you can read the full article. Americans are not willingly going to give up their guns or willingly give up their rights. Now, those that are giving it up have been indoctrinated into a situation where, socialism is better than capitalism and freedom. And any elected politician that promotes socialism should be run out of office and run out of the country. If you like socialism, folks, there's the door. Go to a socialistic country and see how fast you want to come back. But if you want to give up your freedoms, you go ahead and do that. The rest of us are not going to give them up. Let's go back to another soundbite from the 917 Society, another Abraham Lincoln soundbite.
Our nation is divided.
Burning buildings down every night.
Behavior that we are witnessing is shameful.
The Constitution is being challenged.
No amendment to the Constitution is absolute.
But I say, don't interfere with anything in the Constitution. That must be maintained, for it is the only safeguard of our liberties. And not to Democrats alone do I make this appeal, but to all who love these great and true principles. We must look to the future, and to those that we shall leave either a nation holding to the Constitution, or we will leave our nation to destruction. Without the Constitution, what shall guide our nation? Who shall guide our nation? How can I allow our Constitution to be swept away, along with our freedoms it has graced us with? We, the people, are the rightful masters of both Congress and the courts. We should then study the Constitution. Let it be preached from the pulpit, proclaimed in legislatures, enforced in courts of justice. Let every American pledge his life and his sacred honor. Let every man remember the Constitution states, we the people. It holds no man above another. Not even a political person or party is above the people of these United States of America. When the Constitution is removed, then those adversaries will enslave the people under a new authority, to which the people will have no rights except those given by those adversaries who sought to remove the greatest document ever inspired by God Almighty. Why do we need the Constitution, and why should we, the people, guard it with our lives? There are three powers in our government: the legislative, the executive, and the judiciary. History has taught us the dangers if we do not have checks and balances. The separation of powers is an essential element of the rule of law and is enshrined in the Constitution. In closing, do not be ashamed of our nation, nor her past. Rather, look towards her future and how you can be a part. May God guide us to His end.
Great words by Abraham Lincoln. So appropriate today as when they were made when he was president. 150 years ago. 160, I guess. Time flies when you're having fun, folks. All right, one other thing before we get into our two big stories. Then you're saying, hey, you're going to get bigger than what you're doing already? I said, yep. Nikki Haley, former governor of South Carolina and the United States ambassador to the United Nations under Trump, has made it official. She is running to be the GOP nominee for president in 2024. It's official. She's going to make a big speech tomorrow, I think at noon in Charleston, South Carolina. This is interesting, folks. I like Nikki Haley. I could support her. Matter of fact, I was thinking today that might be a better vote. That might be a good vote at this time. Okay, hold on. I'm going to hold it right there. I'll get into this as we go along in other episodes. All right, this lady, I've watched her for many years make mistakes and find a way how to rebound. She would lose ground with her constituency, but find a way to get them back. And as U.S. ambassador, she was a force up there. She did not put up with anything. Nothing. She stood her ground and stood the ground for the United States of America. Now, if she doesn't become the nominee, she could be a great vice presidential nominee to go with the presidential nominee. These are good times, folks. They're fascinating times. Fascinating times. Let's listen. This is Halloween, right? Halloween. Look at me. This is Valentine's Day. So what should we play? Love songs, folks. So go back and let's listen to Try a Little Tenderness.
Oh, she may be weary. Them young girls, they do get weary wearing that same old shaggy dress. Yeah, yeah. But when she gets weary, try a little tenderness. Yeah, yeah. Oh, man, you know she's waiting, just anticipating for things that she'll never possess. Yeah, yeah. while she's there waiting, and without them, try a little tenderness. That's all you gotta do. It's not just sentimental, no, no, no. She had her grief and care, yeah, yeah, yeah. But the soft words, they are spoke so gentle, yeah. It makes it easier to bear, yeah. You won't regret it, no, no. Young girls, they don't forget it. Love is their own happiness, yeah. But it's all so easy. All you gotta do is try. All you gotta do is, man, hold her where you want her. Squeeze her, don't tease her, never leave her. Get you got the fine little tenderness. You got to nobody love her, man. Man, you got to squeeze her, don't tease her, never leave. You got to hold her and rub her soft and let her fine little tenderness. You got to rub her gentle, man. But don't bruise her, no, no. You got to love her, tease her, hold her, squeeze her. Got to drop, man, that drop, a little tenderness. Yeah, what to do? You got to know what to do, man. Take this advice. You gotta love, please. Don't leave my baby.
If you needed to know what to do, that's it. Try a little tenderness, folks. Great song by Otis Redding. One of the best. One of the best. All right. An American Valentine. This was written by Joey Beretta today. What was the publication? Sorry, I didn't write that down. So, he starts out. If you did not know your own birthday, when would you celebrate it? No one knows the date Frederick Douglass was born. Again, here, recognizing and celebrating Black History Month. Frederick Douglass is a great example of overcoming. No one knows the date Frederick Douglass was born. In Narrative of the Life of Frederick Douglass, his first autobiography, Douglass writes, quote, I have no accurate knowledge of my age, never having seen any authentic record containing it. A want of information concerning my own birth was a source of unhappiness to me even during my childhood, unquote. And that could be disturbing. It really could. Free children knew their birthdays, and this gave them a sense of individuality that, according to Douglass, was sorely lacking in enslaved children. What's worse is that Douglass did not even know who his father was, though he suspected it was one of his white slave masters, and spent most of his childhood separated from his mother. She lived on a different plantation 12 miles away, and she could only make the journey by night to visit her son a handful of times. Do you get the picture of slavery and why it's bad, and we should be doing everything today to stop slavery everywhere? All right, back to this article. Nevertheless, his relationships with his mother had a lasting impact on him. In My Bondage and My Freedom, his second autobiography, the title, My Bondage and My Freedom. So he's learning from his past. He's learning from the bad things as well as the good things. This is what we do in life. Everything is a learning experience to give us knowledge and to help us not repeat bad things and to continue to do good things. Douglas tells the story of how he learned he was somebody's child when his mother stood up for him against a cruel slave woman responsible for caring for the children in the plantation house. After the incident, Douglas recounts that his mother gave him a cake. The sweet cake my mother gave me was in the shape of a heart with a rich, dark ring glazed upon the edge of it. I was victorious and well off for the moment, prouder on my mother's knee than a king upon his throne. Can you imagine the love that took place between his mother and himself, even though he didn't see her that often? That bond between mother and child was so strong and should be that she stood up and defended her child and then treated him with a cake. He continued, however, this victorious feeling would be fleeting and he would never see her again. And so, to honor his bond with his mother, Douglas chose to celebrate his birthday on February 14th, Valentine's Day. This episode in Douglas's life is only one example of the deeply personal consequences American slavery had upon the enslaved. In our free online course on civil rights and American history, this was Hillsdale College. Dr. Kevin Porteous describes the nature of slavery, citing the words of Douglas and others to piece together how the institution was inhumane, unjust, and a significant departure from the principles of the American founding. So true. The conditions Douglas experienced as a slave were meant to make him unfit for the life of a free human being. As Dr. Porteous says, slavery is, in many ways, a war against nature. And that's a good way to put that. I like that phrase. Slavery, in many ways, is a war against nature because God wants us all to be free. All his children, every one of them. Frederick Douglass describes the various ways in which the institution of slavery corrupts everything it touches. A mother could not be with her son, and a son did not know his father. And this was by design. Douglas never had a chance at a normal family life. Well, isn't that happening today under the welfare program that the Democrats created, FDR created? They created it to do just that. Not to have a family, not know your father. I'm getting off. Despite growing up enslaved, Douglas would go on to be a prominent defender of founding principles. He believed that a fuller adherence to those principles was the key to incorporating black people into society. As Dr. Porteous explains, he believed that the Constitution and the Declaration of Independence provided the proper framework for the establishment of liberty and justice for the slaves of this country. That's right. He did. Those rights were for all people. It just took a while for it to take effect. Douglas knew the depths of injustice better than most. While his personal story is worthy of story in its own right, his political arguments became even more significant in light of the circumstances into which he was born. And we've talked about some of the things that he's accomplished, or he did accomplish, that still are there and part of the environment and influences we have today. Ladies and gentlemen, this is good stuff, and I highly recommend you go to Hillsdale College. They have all kind of courses you can take. A lot of them are free. They have courses on the Constitution, Declaration of Independence, a whole bunch of other things. A few months ago, I talked about this. They started a course of how did liberalism get started in America. We've discussed that many times and continue to on this program, the Medlock Post, and we'll continue to bring it up. They have a course on it. Other universities are starting to teach these things. Here's a comparison, folks. Liberalism or freedom? Socialism or capitalism? Freedom or slavery? Which do you want? Which is the best? Marxism, capitalism. But Frederick Douglass is a great study, whether you're white or black or Hispanic or whatever. He's an inspiration. If you go study him, he's an inspiration. T. Washington's the same thing. He was a slave. He helped start a university later on. Great stuff, folks. History is there to learn from. You might not like what the history says, but it's there for us to learn. And when we don't study history, what do? We just repeat it. And that's what we're doing in America right now. Is we're repeating bad history, trying to. All right, one more Valentine song here. Oh, that is so sweet. Such a great voice. Etta James, At Last. Warms your heart, folks. That's what we're trying to do here on Valentine's Day. Warm your heart. Federalist 46, written by James Madison. Federalist 46 are all the Federalist papers. You can go online and download them. You don't have to buy them. I did buy a book on Amazon Kindle. They had a special. It was a one-day thing. It was just a bunch of books, and it was the Federalist Papers for like $1.50. And I said, "Well, I'm getting this," and so I've got it. There's a little explanation about some of them in there. It's a good little book, but it was on special that day, or it was $1.95 or something. It wasn't much. It was worth getting. And that's an ebook, folks. I get a lot of ebooks. So wherever I go, I have those books with me. I can pull them up on my phone and show them to people, or look up something that's on my mind right then, and I'm in good shape. Federalist number 46. The influence of the state and federal governments compared. Federalist 46 continues Madison's argument that the federal government could never dominate or obliterate the states, because there was concern at the time that this was too powerful and that the states would lose their sovereignty. So this was written to say the federal government could never dominate or obliterate the states if, ladies and gentlemen, they followed the bounds of the Constitution. All right. He sketches out possible scenarios of federal overreaching and explains why the states would prevail in every case. Addressing the worst-case scenario, Madison assures his readers that a tyrannical president with a powerful army could never impose his rule on America, because the entire American population possesses what? Firearms. Yes. Federalist 46 is important to us today because it is instructive about the right to keep and bear arms as the ultimate safeguard for civic freedom, and because of the growing trend of state resistance to the federal exercise power on intrastate activities, such as the use of medical marijuana or other health care choices. See, we have these overreaches here that the states are saying no, but then we have states that are making laws that override federal law. But in the books, federal law is supposed to take precedent. Madison begins by reminding readers of first principles. The federal and state governments are both servants of the same person or the same master, namely the people. Now we go back to Amendment 10 of the Constitution, which states that, and I'm going to pull it up real quick. I meant to have it right in front of me. So Amendment 10 says, come on, get it here, it's right here. The powers not delegated to the United States by the Constitution, nor prohibited by it to the states, are reserved to the states respectively or to the people, which means that it has to be a vote for something to change. Opponents of the Constitution act as if the federal and state governments were uncontrollable entities who would be at war with each other. To the contrary, both governments are mere agents of the people who are the supreme controlling power. we the people, the governments, both state and federal, are agents of you and I. The people choose to use their federal and state agents for different purposes. So there's no reason to think that the people will allow their two agents to fight with each other or to interfere with each other. Think about that as we go along. The people who are the ultimate deciders will be much more attached to the state governments, Madison predicts. For one thing, there will be many more state employees than federal employees. Not only the individual employees, but their family, friends, social networks, and so on will therefore inevitably have more affection for their close-at-hand state employer than the distant, small federal government. Now, that's a balance going on right now. And it's interesting to look in the last 2 years, why should we give any allegiance, we the people, any allegiance to the federal government? They're trying to destroy us. The people, who are the ultimate deciders, will be much more attached to the state governments, Madison predicts. Never mind. I lost my place. Madison's prediction is still true. Beginning with the New Deal, the federal government began to grow enormously. The New Deal under Franklin Delano Roosevelt. But state and local governments also grew rapidly. As of right now, there are over 4 million state government employees plus 11 million local government employees. This compares to 2.8 million, which is probably now 3.5 million, plus approximately 1.5 million. Actually, it's over 2 million. Well, no, 1.5 to duty U.S. military. So that's a 4-to-1 ratio of state to federal government. Now, that includes police departments, sheriff's offices, fire, EMTs, and on. So think about when you think teachers. Of course, most teachers a lot of them are liberal, so that could be a 50-50 split. Then there's practical experience. Madison reminds his readers that even when the Continental Congress was fighting the Revolutionary War, a task of supreme importance to everyone's freedom, people generally liked their state governments better. Except for a brief period early in the war, the national government was at no time the idol for popular favor, and that opposition to proposed enlargements of its powers and importance was the side usually taken by the men who wished to build their political consequence on the proposition of their fellow citizens. But from Teddy Roosevelt to Barack Obama, many presidents over the last century have worked assiduously to build an idolatrous cult of personality around themselves, and Obama did it best. Over the last century, some men, including Calvin Coolidge and Ronald Reagan, have led successful political careers by resisting proposed enlargements of federal government. Both of them hated big government, hated taxes. Calvin Coolidge probably did more during his time as president to cut taxes, to cut the government, than even Ronald Reagan did. We did an episode on Calvin Coolidge. I think it was called The Wisdom of Calvin Coolidge. But many more politicians have built careers by promising that the federal government will do ever more in taking care of the American people as a de facto, and boy, is that true. Look at today. People are on the welfare dole out is bigger than if people went to work, and that's why they're not working. You have 21 to 25 million people that were put on Medicaid free under the COVID emergency. And the reason that Obama is not shutting it off right now is because if he did, they'd all lose their Medicaid. So he's running it out to, May 5th or May 11th? Because the new program kicks in April 1st, that they can just roll over to that program and keep 21 to 25 million people on Medicaid free. They don't pay for it. He's even now come out and they want Medicaid cards to be able to buy groceries. I think somewhere like $400 a month. Don't hold me to that number. So if you've got a Medicaid card, you can now go buy groceries. It's not just health. And they're doing this in 3 states. They're running a pilot program, Oregon, Arizona, and somewhere else. I can't remember. They want you on the welfare program, and it's hard to get out. Given the advantage currently possessed by the state governments, Madison continues, the people would only transfer their loyalty to the federal government if the federal government were manifestly better and more capable. Well, in this case, under welfare, they are more capable than the states. The states cannot print money, but the feds can, i.e. inflation going like crazy, i.e. national debt over $31 trillion and going up. And talking about debt, Biden stood there last week and said that he cut the deficit by $1.7 trillion, and we know that's not true. And for the last 4 months, his deficit is up over $400 billion. There's nothing wrong with the people giving their confidence where it is most due, even though the states would have little to fear because it is only within a certain fear that the federal power can, in the nature of things, be advantageously administered, according to Madison. Only a certain sphere can their power, federal power, be better. Well, anyway, the 1960s were a time when Madison's predictions about a transfer of affections proved prescient. At the time, the federal government was indeed far more competent and vigorous and far less corrupt. Now, I don't know about that, than many state governments. National trust in the federal government rose to levels never since achieved. One reason for post-60s decline is that as the federal government has tried to do almost everything, it has become less competent at carrying out its core functions. As Madison knew, only with a certain sphere can federal power be advantageously administered. Now, this is correct here, according to Madison. And since the 60s, the federal government has gone downhill because it has expanded, become corrupt. They've given in to the lobbyists. They've given in to foreign powers, and they've taxed everybody, and they're trying to continue to tax everybody and regulate everybody and everything. And the people don't like it. Another power advantage of the state is that the persons who are elected to serve in the federal government will still retain some disposition towards particular state and local interest. In contrast, hardly any state or local officials will have a bias to favor federal interest over state and local interest. And that's true even to this day on an overall scale. Suppose one side or the other goes too far. Again, Madison writes, the advantage lies with the states. If a state is inclined to infringe on the federal sphere, the state actions would presumably be popular people of the state and would immediately be carried into effect by the state government and their employees. The federal government would have no practical means to overcome the states except by the use of force, which would always be viewed with reluctance. Now, this goes back to the marijuana thing. Colorado passed, they legalized marijuana and the sale of it so they could tax the hound out of it. The federal government really could not do anything about it. Now, Arizona, back when Obama was in there and Holder was Attorney General, they passed a law because the borders were wide open. They passed a law that the state National Guard and police forces had the authority to carry out the federal immigration laws. That they could secure the border and do the things that the federal government was not doing. Attorney General Holder and Obama went after Arizona, and they went all the way to Supreme Court, and Supreme Court ruled on the federal side, stating you can't override federal law. The law that Arizona wrote was verbatim the federal law, except where it said federal, it said state. This is how we got into the mess we're in on the border. Now, what if the federal government goes too far? The state's people and government would refuse to cooperate and could obstruct federal actions. If a large resistant state were joined by its neighbors, it would be nearly impossible for the federal government to prevail. And what happened at the border in the last 2 years, it was so overwhelming, the states could not stop it. They're trying to, but they've been totally overwhelmed. This analysis proved accurate for a long time, whether in a good cause, such as resisting federal implementation of the Fugitive Slave Act, or in a bad case, resisting the Supreme Court's desegregation orders from Brown versus Board of Education. Now, that goes back a long way. Because, yeah, they supported Brown versus Board of Education, but a lot of southern states and even other states said, no, we're not going to abide by it. So state governments with strong popular support have often been able to frustrate locally unpopular exercises of federal power. Now, we need to get back to that. States need to be stepping up here. But one major change upset the Madisonian balance. In the 1936 case, United States versus Butler, the Supreme Court said that Congress could use its spending powers for purposes that had nothing to do with the enumerated powers which had been granted to Congress, such as the power to raise armies, set up post offices, and so on. Accordingly, Congress quickly started doling out money to state governments. And the result of that was to make the state governments into de facto wards of their federal sugar daddy. Whenever Congress tugged the purse strings, the states danced. And folks, that is going on today. And they really jumped into this and strengthened it in the early 1970s when the segregation order came down to segregate the schools. The federal government stepped in with all this money and took over the schools and the education process. And we've seen what happened. It went downhill. And liberalism and indoctrination and everything else has just taken over there. So southern state governments' resistance to school desegregation did not end because of a few instances in which the president sent in federal troops to enforce court orders. As Madison expected, use of military force was still a last resort. Formal Southern resistance ended when Congress's Civil Rights Act of 1964 cut off federal education money to segregated states. A good result, although not all subsequent federal threats of withholding money could be for such benign purposes. Now, what the states should have done, because in 1964 the money was not that big and the states could have survived. But the politicians running the states decided, oops, we better bow to the bigger God here. And they did. And it escalated in the 70s. Now, what about a worst-case scenario in which a federal tyrant attempted to use the federal standing army to impose a national dictatorship? Madison derided the possibility, since the people would never consent to the long-term buildup of a powerful military establishment. Here, Madison was correct for about a century and a half. After the Civil War and World War I, the large federal military was quickly demobilized and the standing army shrunk to a size appropriate for a mid-level European power or less. But the aftermath of World War II did not go as planned. The Soviet Union, rather than becoming a global partner in peace and stability, emerged as an aggressive superpower intent on taking over wherever possible and seeking the ultimate destruction of the United States and Western civilization. In the resulting Cold War, the United States, by necessity, grew used to a large permanent standing army. I don't have time to play it. I don't know if I've got it uploaded, but President Eisenhower, who was the big general in World War II on the European front, commanding general, as president, he issued a statement to beware of the military-industrial complex. We'll have to get into that. I'll make a note here. We have a military-industrial complex today that is basically, in some ways, helping to run globalism. Madison continued his hypothetical. The largest possible federal army could not constitute more than 1% of the total population. This is indeed the size of the current federal military, counting active duty plus reserves. But with conscription, the federal army could be much larger than that. In 1945, the military constituted 6% of the total population. Today, that would mean a military of about 18 million. So we are a long way from 18 million in the military. Against this federal army, Madison said, would be essentially the entire able-bodied male population with their own guns and organized into militias directed by the state governments. This huge force could never be conquered by the much smaller federal army. Now, folks, I want you to think about that, because Obama was moving toward that. Yes, I talked about it on my previous radio show back then. There was a lot of evidence and a lot of whistleblowers coming forth saying that he was trying to build an Obama army to take over the United States. He brought in United Nations troops, the blue helmets, onto American soil to help. Well, they got ran out of here real fast. And I'm not even going to talk about militias right now. To these federal soldiers would be opposed a militia amounting to near 500,000 of citizens with arms in their hands, officered by men chosen from among themselves, fighting for their common liberties, and united and conducted by governments possessing their affections and confidence. It may well be doubted whether a militia thus circumstanced would ever be conquered by such a proportion of regular troops. And again, how many of those troops would turn against their own country? Let's just, for instance, hypothetically say 50% would turn against the country. And the other 50%, well, they're going to go join the militias, right? Now, this says 500,000. That's 500,000. Gun owners in this country, and a lot of them are former military. They're well organized. They know what to do. And I've heard this, well, the standing military, well, they've got the bombs and the planes and et cetera, et cetera. Well, that's fine. But they can't overcome 500,000 people to 1.8 million. You'd be overrun. It'd probably be down to like 500,000 because everybody else would desert. So we're not doing this. I swore an oath to the Constitution, not to the President of the United States. Crucial reason why America was free and Europe was not, that America had guns and state governments. The combination of the two would be sufficient to demolish any national tyrant. And it's still subscribed, folks, that the reason we haven't been invaded by Russia or China is because of 80 million people that own guns or more and that know how to use them. Besides the advantage of being armed, which the Americans possess over the people of almost every other nation, the existence of subordinate governments to which the people are attached and by which the militia officers are appointed forms a barrier against the enterprises of ambition more insurmountable than any which a simple government of any form can admit of. Notwithstanding the military establishments in the several kingdoms of Europe, which are carried as far as the public resources will bear, the governments are afraid to trust the people with arms. Now, they're out there again today because of that shooting at, what was it, Michigan State? Out there again today. Got to get the guns. Got to get the guns. The guns were a weapon. The people pulled the trigger. The first thing that a socialist or communist gets powered, the first thing they do is take away the people's guns and their right to speech. They control all the media. And it is not certain that with this aid alone that they would not be able to shake off their yokes. But were the people to possess the additional advantages of local governments chosen by themselves, who could collect the national will and direct the national force, and of officers appointed out of the militia by these governments and attached both to them and to the militia, it may be affirmed with the greatest assurance that the throne of every tyranny in Europe would be speedily overturned in spite of the legions which surrounded it. Do you get that, folks? We have the power. Now, I am not in no way promoting that we go out and form our armies and take over the federal government. That's not how it works, folks. It isn't. The Constitution gives us a way to do it, and it's through Article 5, Convention of States, which liberals oppose wholeheartedly. Now, fortunately, we have never had to see whether Madison was right that a federal tyrant with a standing army could be defeated by the people. We do know that in other places, Israel fighting for independence from Great Britain in 1946 and 47, armed popular forces have been able to drive out very strong armies. Of course, the modern availability of nuclear weapons would give an American tyrant weapons which the armed civilians could never defeat. Now, we've talked about that. And if they're stupid enough to use nuclear weapons against its own citizens, heaven forbid. But we do know that Madison was right then and now about the advantage of being armed, which the American possessed over the people of almost every other nation. Hitler, Stalin, Mao, Pol Pot took advantage of victim disarmament in order to murder millions of people. Federalist 46 also shows the error of the notion that James Madison, the author of the Second Amendment, imagined that any individual could decide that the federal government was tyrannical and then resort to violence. To this contrary, Madison envisioned that, in the very unlikely event that forcible resistance were necessary, it would be led by the states. Federalist 46 is an important corrective to persons, including gun prohibitionists, who like to conjure up extreme scenarios, who imagine that a strong interpretation of the Second Amendment must lead to the legal authorization of anti-government violence by stray individuals. Madison has been proven correct in regarding mass national armed resistance to federal tyranny as a very unlikely possibility. He was also right in a much broader sense in that the American system of federalism, which many powers retained by state governments, and the American gun culture with its associated spirit of self-reliance and possibilities, have helped form a freedom-loving American national character which has prevented the federal government from degenerating into despotism. And so far, we have prevented that. We have some tyrants sitting in Washington, D.C. They are tyrants. They're Marxists. And they have great plans to destroy America and take us over. And they want our guns. They want our guns so they can be in control and do whatever they want to do. Let's listen to this real quick.
Oh, I'm a good American, now that's just what I am. And for the liberal nation, I do not give a damn. Don't want to rise against her, but I'll gather up my guns. My freedom won't be taken, I'll fight 'em till I've won. I hate a liberal nation and everything they do. I hate the social programs and stimulus bill too. I hate the federal government stripping away our rights. I hate all socialism, time for states to fight. I was born here in this nation, lived here all my life. I love my founding fathers and share their view of rights. Working men and women, rather die poor and free. 'Cause we know what freedom stands for, no Denny states for me. No universal health care or fairness doctrine touts. We like free market systems, to hell with these bailouts. For all the politicians who think revolt won't brew, if you take away my freedom, my votes won't be for you. No longer will I whisper, this land should be free. I'll voice my opinions, my kids will sure thank me. I don't want no pardons for what I say and am. Obama won't remake me, and I do not give a damn. Oh, I'm a good American, now that's just what I am. And for a liberal nation, I do not give a damn. Don't want to rise against her, but I'll gather up my guns. My freedom won't be taken, I'll fight 'em till I've won. And I don't want any pardon for what I say and am.
Amen. This is the fire that we need inside of us to save America. No violence. But if they try to come after us, there's things I can't tell you. Part of what I reported, they're part of state governments. The state governments are aware of it. They've authorized them. And those militias will be part of the state government. Boom. They're ready to protect us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, Valentine's Day. I hope you have either have carried out plans or will carry out plans for your loved one and your family. Include your family in this. Makes it a whole lot nicer. Really do. So let's listen to Otis Redding.
I've been loving you too long to stop now. And you want to be free. My love is growing stronger as you become a habit to me. Ooh, and loving you too long. I don't want to stop now. With you, my life has been so wonderful. I can't stop now. And your love is growing old. My love is growing stronger as our affair grows old. I've been loving you oh too long to stop now. I've been loving you a little too long. I don't want to stop now. Don't make me stop now. Down on my knees, please don't make me stop now. I love with all my heart, and I can't stop now. Please, don't make me stop now.
Great soul music. Great music to kindle your love, to strengthen it with your spouse, your children, your parents. That's the way we do it here. All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're wrapping up the episode for today, episode 112, on this happy Valentine's Day in 2023. We appreciate your support. We appreciate your messages to me, the things you send to me. I wish we could get to all of them. They're all important information. A lot of times I've seen it or I've already put it into a script, but I do appreciate it. And keep it up. I appreciate a conversation I had this morning with one of the listeners. And he said your show last week about lying made him have a self-evaluation about his life because of wow, there should never be a lie. It made me think, folks. So we educate, we empower, we enlighten. That's our goal. But most of all, we want to build your patriotism. Your patriotism. So, ladies and gentlemen, that's it for the Medlock Post radio show for today. May God bless you and may God bless America. And let's finish this song.